Hey, it's ENDYMION, and today I got plenty of updates on the ongoing battle against identity politics within the world at large. From investment firms admitting defeat as billions and even trillions are lost in the chase of agenda, to financial analysts pleading for companies to reject the woke crusade. Beyond this, we have games tied to these concepts currently failing or showing no signs of recovery, from stuff like Dragon Age to Indiana Jones and even things about Stellar Blade and more, so let's get into it. Firstly, let's talk about those investments and how things are going. Well, to put it to you straight, it's going horribly, fellas, for these investors when it comes to pandering to the modern audience. Let's start with this article from Fandom Pulse. Dozens of financial advisors warn corporate America that DEI initiatives are a liability. So pretty much, once Trump won the election, the woke agenda scurried like rats under the floorboards. They are now being hunted by many and being exposed for what they are. I'm sure you've also seen that whole Jaguar ad nonsense too, probably. It's the one with the ethnically diverse people walking around in colorful outfits, which has absolutely nothing to do with Jaguar as a car manufacturer. Yeah, it's stuff like this is why people are pushing back so hard against these things in the first place. By the way, Jaguar stock has plummeted since they revealed that moronic ad, but again, these things happen because companies refuse to actually make products anymore for the real human beings that are out here. They're instead in these echo chambers agreeing with themselves, and in turn it's costing them trillions of dollars in the process. This rejection of wokeness is being felt widespread, and now the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a collection of American investors and advisors that manage over $16 billion in assets, have issued a joint letter against any and all corporations to cease their crusade for identity politics. Here's what it says. We are investors, investment advisors, fiduciaries, and proxy voting and corporate engagement consultants to investors. And the State Financial Officers Foundation, a coalition of 38 financial officers from 28 states, representing over half of the country that focuses on free market principles, federalism, and economic freedom, while protecting taxpayer dollars through strong fiscal responsibility and responsible financial management. We write to urge you to provide needed transparency to shareholders on pressing cultural issues that are impacting your companies. This November, the American electorate overwhelmingly rejected the ideological takeover of political and civic life by narrow-minded identity politics. Critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion try to promote belonging and inclusion, but in reality sacrifice true diversity and equal opportunity by focusing only on differences based on skin color, sex, or religious status. It is now a liability for any institution to tout adherence to DEI ideology. Recent Supreme Court decisions have cast serious doubt on the legality of DEI, which has led to a full-scale legal assault on DEI according to the Wall Street Journal. The data underlying the push for DEI have been exposed as overstated at best or worse, downright false. Faced with public exposure for the mere existence of DEI programs in their companies, major American brands including Tractor Supply, John Deere, Harley-Davidson, Jack Daniels, Ford, and Toyota have responded by affirmatively distancing themselves from DEI and related commitments to the far-left human rights campaign. The downfall of DEI even extends to college campuses, as the New York Times Magazine recently reported. A 10-year investment of $250 million to promote and ingrain DEI has backfired so completely that University of Michigan's own data suggests that in striving to become more diverse and equitable, the school has also become less inclusive. I could keep reading more and more of this letter, but I think you all get the point. By and large, the American public proved with their voices that they have resoundingly rejected the agenda being pushed by mega corporations into their daily lives. Things like Jaguar right now are just another example of why these things cannot continue and must be removed completely. This rejection of DEI and ESG is a war cry as far as I'm concerned, of people who have become sick and tired of the leftist political agenda that has been infecting everything for so long. We all lived for 4 years as a world under the weak leadership of a liberal leader in America, and it then spawned all sorts of calamities, and the ruin that spewed from that leadership spilled over to other countries as well. Simply put, we are done. Nobody wants this anymore, yet they will continue to push it because they truly believe it is what you actually want in the end, despite the results not giving the feedback that they desire. Even AsiaAssetManagement.com had an article from earlier this year. foretelling just how poorly this is going for these investment firms that are pushing DEI. Their article is titled, ESG Investing Loses Luster. This was published in June of 2024. And what it actually says rings true even now all the way near the end of this same year. The article opens with environmental, social, and governance investing was never going to be a panacea for climate change ills, and the growing reaction against it now highlights the risk of poorly thought out measures. It also means that time may have been wasted in the quest for financial solutions in the climate fight. A net US $40 billion has been withdrawn from ESG equity funds thus far in 2024. The Financial Times reported on June 6, citing research from Barclays. According to the report, this is the first year that the flows have tended negative since ESG investing was launched 20 years ago, with investors turning their backs on sustainability-focused stock funds as poor performance, scandals, and attacks by right-wing US politicians hit a sector that has pulled in trillions of dollars in assets. AsiaAssets.com then cites Bloomberg for this next part. By the way, before I continue here, I do need to remind you that Bloomberg is a company that openly embraces and pushes concepts like DEI and ESG in every facet of their company. Jason Schreier, a well-known video games journalist who regularly reports on studios closing down and the qualms of the industry at large, has said multiple times that the game industry specifically is not dying due to this injection of wokeness. Yet he also ignores the fundamental fact that his job is tied to a company in Bloomberg that openly brags about how it is funded and kept alive by the very assets and investing these American and now Asian groups are stating as death cries for the industry at large. So now let's get back to this Asia Assets article, where they then say, according to a Bloomberg intelligence report in January, global ESG assets surpassed $30 trillion in 2022 and are on track to top $40 trillion by 2030, or over 25% of the $140 trillion of assets under management projected by that year. But the recent trends have raised questions about this growth. Estimates of the amount of assets managed in the form of ESG can vary widely depending upon the definition of what constitutes investments that should fall under the categories of environmental and sustainable, especially, and sometimes of governance too. The issue that is likely to be raised by the seemingly growing disenchantment with ESG is whether money would be better directed into other forms of sustainable investments, such as impact investing. More fundamentally, there is the prospect of securitizing ESG investments made by multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, which are becoming increasingly involved in climate change prevention and sustainability issues. Okay, so they're projecting that overall this woke pandering nonsense is expected to launder somewhere in the $140 trillion mark in terms of overall investments by 2030. Of course, they projected this sometime around 2020 when ESG was making a roaring comeback. Now, 4 years into this experiment, we can see the fruits of said labor. A failed presidential cycle in America, which resulted in not one, but two new wars starting due to the declining leadership in the superpower that is America. And of course, in terms of gaming and such, which I mostly cover, I mean, the proof is as plain as day to see. These things are not selling. For example, Suicide Squad recently was a mere $5 on PC, for an edition of the game that was retailing for around $100 originally. Nobody was buying the game. Of course, it was worked on by Sweet Baby Inc., which is a company tied to ESG and DEI and has direct ties to all the other big scary companies out there like BlackRock and more. That's not even the end of it, since Reflector Entertainment recently laid off about 18% of their employees as well. In case you forgot, Reflector worked on the flop that was Unknown 9 Awakening, which starred an Indian woman named Haruna who spoke with an Indian accent as a superhuman heroine that just kills white men constantly. The game was meant to spawn almost 10 plus multimedia projects from a TV show, movie, comics, podcast, and more. And it's very unlikely that any of this will really come to fruition due to how poorly the main game is sold. Reflector was also in a very similar way bought the same way that Firewalk was by Sony, which made Concord and then died as well. There's this very weird thread line through these companies where ESG is implemented, promises are made, and then money is exchanged. Then things get made, and now in 2024, we're seeing the fruits of a lot of these labors that have ties to this ideology. And the common endgame here is massive underperformance, horrible reviews, and becoming laughing stocks of the internet in response. It's very weird how every one of these games that are both ESG and wokeified are being made almost exclusively by new startup studio companies, besides stuff like Rocksteady with Suicide Squad, which is an anomaly, I guess. But anyway, these are then sold for a premium to legacy industry giants, whether it's Sony with Firewalk and Concord, or Bandai Namco with Reflector and Unknown 9. And then what gets made doesn't meet their expectations remotely, and then things implode. The only people here who win in the end are the real grifters of the gaming industry, which are people like Kimball Lair Sweet Baby who likely make millions in returns by effectively destroying properties, and people's livelihoods and more, just to make their wallets fatter in the end.
We're the aliens, we're the refugees, we walk among you, we're right behind you. Your time is past, your kind won't last. We're the dust fortress, this bug is airborne.
Even upcoming releases like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle are allegedly being largely ignored by the gaming public. There were also rumors that this Indiana Jones game had Sweet Baby Inc. attached to it. However, I would implore people to not spread that as fact until there's actual confirmation of this. That being said, Indiana Jones, as reported here by Fandom Pulse, is having abysmal pre-order numbers. In fact, they're currently 86% worse than Dragon Age's, if you can believe it. If I had to wager, Fandom Pulse's insider source here is someone I also talked to who works for a retail chain in America that has given me plenty of info on the sales of these games as well. Allegedly, the premium edition of Indiana Jones was pre-ordered 208 times physically across America in this particular retail chain, but already 42 of those pre-orders were cancelled. Overall, pre-orders for Indiana Jones in total at this specific retailer were 257 pre-orders in total, which is, yes, abysmal, and unfortunately I can't say where this person works, but trust me when I tell you, it's a really big and well-known retailer that you've likely gone to yourself. Fandom Pulse then shares Stuttering Craig a side-scroller's post where he relays the Dragon Age pre-order numbers from the same source. But yeah, these pre-orders in general and being tied to ESG and whatnot, it's terrible and it's the same thing over and over again. All of this stems from this open rejection of ESG across the board, as you'd expect. People are sick of agenda pushing and the nonsense that comes with it, yet these companies are regularly attempting to push these things into people's lives more and more. It doesn't feel organic, and it's clearly costing them money in the long run. But you know the writing is on the wall when places like CNN back in 2023 admitted that investors want to throw ESG and wokeness into the garbage due to how much money they're losing because of it. Just in the first quarter of 2023 alone, ESG lost investors a combined total of $163.2 billion. And a reminder that $163.2 billion was lost when ESG was still being pushed as the de facto future-proof ideology that they were selling to these investors. Now in 2024, this almost sacrilegious speak has become a rallying cry, and this number has skyrocketed into the trillions. And this is why you'll have people attacking you, especially those who work in companies that are tied to or kept afloat by these very investments, because they have no choice but to dance for their investors because they depend on them for their own survival. It's why you will never hear Jason Schreier of Bloomberg bad-mouthing ESG or admitting that yes, these games are all failing because they're forcing ideologies into them. He'll always spin the story like a good yes man does and find a way to place the blame on a CEO or corporate greed instead, as if adding microtransactions to a game is the reason why they died, and not the fact that they made everything gay and pandered like crazy. Sure, Jason, whatever you say.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
Other journalists are also turning heel too. Remember when Stellar Blade came out earlier this year? And lots of journalists tried to then spin stories saying that Stellar Blade was this overtly sexual male fantasy game and should not be praised or empowered to become the new norm, and then it did really well and continues to do so even to this day. This brings me to Paul Tassi of Forbes. Look, I don't hate the guy or anything like that. I'm wholly indifferent to him as a person. I only follow him on Twitter in a similar fashion as to why I follow IGN, which is for game news and the occasional jab at their reporting. But I don't think Paul Tassi is anywhere near as phony as, say, Jason Schreier is, but anyways, I digress. Paul used to hate Stellar Blade openly, a game that openly also rejects DEI and wokeness. Here's his article when Stellar Blade just came out, where he had his article that he titled, "Stellar Blade is now the highest user-scored PS5 game ever, which is a bit excessive." A lot of articles like these were being made at the time, by the way, that we shouldn't be praising Stellar Blade, because it's nothing special, even though personally it's in my top games of the year easily and I love the game. Then recently, Paul Tassi, yet again of Forbes, then wrote this article. Stellar Blade, one of 2024's best games, is finally on sale. Oh, now it's one of the best games of the year, Paul? I thought it was a bit excessive, don't you think? Of course, he then says this in his own article. By the way, this was all founded by Grums on Twitter. Here's what Paul said in his article about the bit excessive but also one of the best games of the year, Stellar Blade. By default, Stellar Blade will lose Best Action Game to Black Myth Wukong, given that game is nominated for Game of the Year. While nothing else in the category is, this remains a very dumb part of the Game Awards, but I would personally argue it's better. Stellar Blade is probably in my top 3 games of 2024, and I'd consider it one of the year's best, especially if we aren't counting expansions like Shadow of the Erdtree. Wow, Paul, so the game being rated really highly was a bit excessive. Yet you just said the game was nothing special and so on, but of course this was in a part of 2024 where you still had your liberal president. And ESG was not doing well, but it was still ongoing. And the narrative at the time with games journalists was that Stellar Blade was bad because EVE was too hot and so on. But now Trump wins, ESG is dying, the red wave has washed over, causing tons of these weirdos to now mass exodus themselves to blue sky, and then you are now admitting that Stellar Blade is not only a great game, but in your top 3 of the year as well. I love how quickly these journalists change their tune depending on how the wind is blowing. They're political chameleons. Eventually they'll start running stories saying that they never attacked players, and they're magically saying, "Oh, actually, I always loved sexy women in games." Right, of course you did. Yet if Kamala Harris won, you'd be drinking your soy lattes and putting the word brat unironically in your articles to pander for the next 4 years instead. It's why what I always say, which is that this whole ESG thing, the whole movement, the money, the people, the opinions, none of it was ever genuine. When the trillions were flooding in and their bellies were full, they would say anything that was required of them to ensure that the payments kept coming. And like animals in the wild, they will pivot in any way they can to ensure they can survive, even if it means completely abandoning their morals, and admitting to things that only 6 months ago, if they wrote, their journalists and industry friends would then crucify them over. This is what I mean when I say people don't trust journalists anymore, because you guys don't have any consistency. It's just like how wokeness is. It's a virus that is constantly changing and morphing its form based on what needs to be accepted so that it can grow and survive. How can you guys call yourselves journalists with integrity when you can't keep your own narrative straight? Again, this is not even directed solely at Paul Tassi. This is to PC Gamer, IGN, The Gamer, and so many others. They constantly will say whatever they need to as long as it's considered socially acceptable. But I implore you all to never forget what these journalists pushed, how they hated on beauty and based gaming for years, calling you bigots, phobes, and so on, and then they'll shift the goalposts like they always try to do, and then create new narratives. I guarantee you, once the ESG money dries up entirely, I wouldn't be surprised if Paul Tassi, unironically, just starts wearing a Make America Great Again hat if it means people will take his opinions seriously in the future. Finally, I want to just go over this other nail in the coffin, which is Kotaku complaining that their darling didn't get nominated enough, and ironically enough, both Kotaku and this game, which is Dragon Age, both benefit from the ESG and DEI agenda openly, very much so. The Kotaku article is titled, "The Game Awards Should Happen After the Year is Over, Like Every Other Award Show. The timing of Jeff Keighley's award show cuts games like Dragon Age the Veilguard off at the knees." So now journalists, like this Kenneth Shepard of Kotaku, are complaining that their very game got snubbed because of time constraints. Wow, okay then. Of course, Kenneth Shepard of Kotaku then says this in the very same article. Inevitably, there will be those who will say the Veilguard wasn't snubbed and that it just didn't deserve recognition, pushing aside the bad faith, transphobic, and racist nonsense that's been surrounding the games for months. There's a discussion to be had there. It is without a doubt one of the more divisive games in BioWare's catalog. And there it is. Of course, someone at Kotaku thinks like this. Look, Dragon Age Veilguard failed for the same reason why your investment firms are panicking over losing trillions of dollars chasing the agenda. It's because nobody wants us anymore. Your own game journalist friends are turning on Dragon Age aplenty all over. Just go look it up. Even PC Gamer has been attacking Dragon Age constantly this past week and then some. Nobody wants your slop. It didn't get nominated because it wasn't worthy of those nominations. That's all it was. After all, gaming websites told us that there was no conspiracy last year when Hogwarts Legacy wasn't nominated for anything at these websites nor the Game Awards either. Even though, fun fact, Hogwarts scored higher critically than Dragon Age did as well. So like always, when the games not pushing what they want don't get nominated, it's totally fine. But when the games they want to get nominated don't get nominated, but also push ESG nonsense, suddenly now it's a problem and we all need to do better. Okay, got it, Kotaku. Totally not at all related, right? Look, I platinumed and 100%ed both Hogwarts Legacy and Dragon Age Veilguard. And I can tell you with confidence that Hogwarts is a much better game in every single way. It actually also feels like it's a part of the world, unlike Dragon Age, and the exploration was really fun in Hogwarts and flying around was really awesome. And look, I don't even really like Harry Potter that much, but even I have to admit that it was a well done game. The only part of Kotaku's article that I agree with is where they say this. So why does the Game Awards do things this way? We reached out to the show for comment but didn't receive an answer in time for publication. But I would hypothesize that much of it boils down to the show feeling like an ad for games rather than a celebration of them. Yeah, Kotaku, that's exactly it. It's why I tell people don't take the Game Awards as gospel. It's not a show meant to celebrate games. It's far more focused on advertising and pushing Hollywood nonsense so that they can get more money from people. That's all it's ever been. If the Game Awards actually cared about video games, they wouldn't have the trailers and celebrity guests. But they know that nobody cares about these awards enough, so the only way that they can get people to watch it is with trailers or giveaways. I don't frankly care who or what wins any awards this year specifically. All of it is pointless, it's all slop anyways, who cares? But the fact the wokeness they pushed has been so defiantly rejected is proof that this cannot continue. They're losing trillions, their games and other products are not selling. Journalists are now turning heel to survive and stay in the conversation, and Kotaku is mad that their woke slop game didn't get nominated enough. Too bad, better luck next time I guess. It'll be very interesting to see where games end up by next year. Will wokeness be eradicated 100%, or will it simply get worse? I guess time will tell. But if it's any indication of which way the wind is blowing, one thing remains true, which is that common sense is winning, based gaming is returning, and the audience is absolutely over it. Just stop pandering and start making great games again, or you will continue to feel the wrath of the millions of players you freaks keep rejecting. Maybe we can up those trillions by 50% next year if we keep rejecting enough. Anyway, that's what I got for you today. Thank you for being here, subscribe, have a great day, and I just want to say I'm proud of you all for being so defiant in your rejection of this nonsense. Keep it up, fellas, and I'll see you soon.